Mississippi Ag, 16 locations, about to be 18. Manage your land with the John Deere tractor. AgUp.com to find a retail location nearest you. Show is also brought to you by Havana Smoke Shop, 2 locations. Across from Shaggy's at the Reservoir and then I-55 North in Jackson. We welcome in Tom Luginbill, National College Football Analyst with ESPN. And Tom joins us on the Modelo guest line. Throughout the offseason, people in the world of college football were talking about Spencer Rattler and Sam Howell, maybe even a couple others at the quarterback position. Tom and I were talking about Matt Corral. I think it's pretty obvious he's the best quarterback in the country, and it's probably not close. But we want to bring Lugs in before we jump in to Ole Miss at Bama and kind of ask him why maybe Oklahoma and North Carolina are not hitting on all cylinders with Rattler and Sam Howell, especially Oklahoma. Looks like they're regressing. Tom, what are your thoughts on why things are not looking maybe like they should be in Norman, Oklahoma?
Inconsistent and at times poor offensive line play. It's that simple. The thing about Oklahoma that I think people gloss over a little bit, Bo, and we've become so accustomed to see the quarterback play. I mean, you've got the Samaje Perine and you've got these running backs, you got Mixon, and you've got all these wide receivers, all really, really good players. But the whole entire foundation of that offense is run first, play action pass. And right now they can't run the football consistently. They can't block anybody at the point of attack. So now they don't have that play action run game element. They're not a drop back pass team. And that's kind of what they've turned into. And, Spencer Rattler is not making very good decisions. He's been under duress. Not all of that is his fault. But it's interesting that you asked this question about them because it's really kind of an epidemic across the landscape of college football right now. I mean, look at Clemson in the offensive line.
Awful.
I mean, they're downright dreadful. North Carolina in the offensive line is struggling. They were struggling to block Georgia Tech last week. They don't have the run game that they had a year ago. So now that's affecting Sam Howell. And, I look across college football, and I'm looking like LSU right now in the offensive line, struggling. Texas A&M, struggling in the offensive line. Up until this past week, Texas was struggling really poorly in the offensive line. And then all of a sudden, they just obliterate Texas Tech. Next thing you know, the passing game's wide open, and they're doing anything they want to do when they want to do it. So this is something that seems to be a real issue right now across all of college football.
Tom Luginbill on the Out of Bounds show. All right, so the Ole Miss Bama game opened at 17.5. It's now at 14.5. 2:30 CBS. It'll be in Bryant-Denny. I thought somebody made a great point. One of your Brad Edwards last week, he said, look, Ole Miss, has a chance to come in here and no doubt put a lot of pressure on Bama. He said, but remember this. Nobody had a tough road game last year, and now you're seeing some of these teams travel into a stadium that's got 80, 100, 105,000 people, and it's just a different deal. So Corral didn't have – he's great. He's the best player in the best quarterback in the country. But it'll be 105,000 people in Bryant-Denny on Saturday. So that's their first true road test in 2 years. What do you make of that, Tom?
I think it's very real. And listen, I've been a part of it this fall. Me and many others in broadcasting were sidelined last year and, called games from sterile environments with no noise, no atmosphere, no distractions. And now, you're back in stadiums and it is real. And it's something that from a communication standpoint, we're seeing people have trouble with it. We're seeing false starts, seeing delay of games, and it gets you off track. I think that's the one thing that with Ole Miss to this point, they have been really, really good at playing at a high pace and a high rate while executing at the same time. The question is going to be, what if they get off schedule? What if the crowd becomes a factor in communication? It becomes an issue in any way. Are they going to be at their best if they're not going 100 miles an hour? I think those are all very real factors. And Lane Kiffin and Jeff Lebby, they're aware of it. I mean, they realize that this is going to be a daunting task, not just with the opponent, but the atmosphere.
All right, with the Ole Miss, let's start Ole Miss offense, Bama defense. Where does Ole Miss have the best advantage in this matchup, Tom?
Running the quarterback. Listen, if there's been a common denominator when we've seen Alabama either lose a game or give up points, the quarterback is a factor in the run game. And we know Ole Miss has weapons. We know they have pace of play as a benefit. But I really believe, and all you got to do is go back and watch. Everybody's giving Florida a hard time, and they're trying to kind of work through the quarterback position. But when they lined up against Alabama, Dan Mullen knew full well that we have to have a lot of backfield action. We have to have a lot of motion and shifts, and the quarterback could at any moment end up with the football in the run game, and they had Alabama on their heels. And I think I'm not saying you have to have a heavy dose of it, but if you're going to have an advantage, you're going to have to force Alabama to defend quarterback run. And I'm not talking about like the creative plays and plays that can be expanded with your feet and keeping a play alive. I'm talking about where the play call is a run by the quarterback.
Okay, where does Bama have the advantage? Bama's D against Ole Miss's offense.
Their front. I think the front seven with Alabama is going to be something that could get Ole Miss off schedule a little bit. And when I say off schedule, you got to realize that pace of play and going fast and tempo and all of that revolves entirely around whether or not you can get first downs. You can't go fast if you can't get first down. So if you get behind the chains on your early downs, now you're out of sync and you're not playing the game to the level that you're capable of playing it or playing the game that you want to play. And generally, what happens is teams that are really good up front, teams that are very, very disruptive up front, are teams that can get teams off schedule. And I think that's where Alabama, if they can get lined up and their personnel and their talent can be very, very disruptive up front.
Tom Luginbill on the Out of Bounds show. Ole Miss at Bama this weekend. And I think Ole Miss should, be in the top 5 or top 6, but we'll see. And we'll ask Tom what we threw out to the listeners in the first hour about SEC teams and so on. But, all right, let's flip it. Bama's offense against, Ole Miss's defense. Ole Miss really hasn't played anybody, but a lot of people believe that they're going to be able to score like crazy in this track meet. Is this just an absolute and total mismatch with Ole Miss's offense Bama's offense against the Ole Miss defense, Tom?
I think it could be in the back end for Ole Miss. I'm concerned about how they're going to hold up in terms of pass efficiency defense and limiting explosive plays. That's the whole thing in all of this. If we're going to assume that Ole Miss can score points, and I think we all think that Ole Miss will be capable of scoring points, the question is, how do you make Alabama earn it as far as limiting explosive plays? You can't go out and have and just give up big 60-yarders, 50-yarders, 40-yarders. You need to condense the game and force Alabama to chip away at it. Now, I don't know if Ole Miss is capable of doing that. I think they've made improvements defensively from a year ago, but I think their back end is an area that Lane Kiffin's got to be awfully concerned with when you look at Alabama's weapons.
Do you think that I think Ole Miss's offense is better than Bama's, although Bama's is really good. How do you see it, Tom?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. I think this year's iteration, I would agree with you. I think there are more explosive elements. It's probably a fair debate. A year ago, people, in my opinion, are maybe overvaluing Alabama a little bit on the offensive side of the ball when you consider the personnel that they lost and how impactful that personnel was from a year ago. To me, they're kind of trying to find the right blend, the right mix. I don't know if they truly know who they are yet. They're a team, too, that's had to kind of work through the offensive line, and they struggled in the offensive line versus Florida. Florida defensively, particularly in the third quarter,
They did.
Owned Alabama up front. And so I think that as a whole, probably Ole Miss is a better group. But who knows? We'll find out on Saturday just how far along Alabama's come. The thing that's been good for Ole Miss is Nick Saban and his team and how they won against Florida, how they were lackluster against Mercer, and then they bounced back obviously this past week. But he's got a lot of coaching material to use, and generally when Alabama does that, they play really, really well.
Who's the X factor for Ole Miss on offense outside of Corral? Do you go with the offense? Obviously, they have skill guys everywhere with Ely, Drummond, Sanders, and so on. But do you go right back on the offensive line, and depending on the day they have? So.
I do. I think that's going to be a big part of it, a really big part of it. And to be honest with you, the X factor to me is how fast can they go.
Okay, tempo. I got you.
Do they get off schedule, or are they dictating to Alabama how the game's going to be played?
All right.
Because that's the one thing we haven't seen Ole Miss. We haven't seen them yet have a team that can alter their pace of play.
Yeah, they hadn't been rattled at all.
Very interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point.
No. Yeah.
All right. So here's the way I look at it, but I'll just go ahead and ask you for a prediction. I think Ole Miss has the best offense in the country, and then Alabama has the most talent in the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So how do you see it Saturday afternoon around 6 o'clock in Tuscaloosa?
Got to score at least 40 to be in the game in the fourth quarter. I mean, I think I know I sound like a broken record when I say that. And my analysis of Alabama is becoming increasingly simplistic, but it's really true. I mean, at the end of the day, if they've got the better roster and you know that they can score, all right, who in college football right now do you think could put up 40 on Alabama? Probably Ole Miss, right?
Right.
Because I don't think you can win that game if you're scoring in the 30s. I just don't think you can, and I think that's what makes this game so intriguing, and probably what scares the heck out of Alabama. Is Alabama the better team? Yes, but if you can score and you keep it within a possession or so in the fourth quarter, now all of a sudden momentum and confidence swings Ole Miss's way.
Yeah, because all the pressure's on Bama. I mean, Ole Miss, if Lane and the crew can get that all week going, they can play kind of loose and fast and free because, like you said, if it's a one-possession game in the second half, the pressure goes all towards the Crimson Tide sideline.
Right.
Okay.
Right. You don't want to be on the road and constantly be playing catch-up.
Right. All right. Tom Luginbill on the Out of Bounds show and the Modelo guest line. By the way, Tom, I know they started slow, and it didn't surprise me because they had just played Bama, but I still think watch out for Florida. I think the more reps Emory Jones gets, and Dan is so good at that position, and they look like they're getting better in the line of scrimmage, they could be a different team 6 weeks from now, Luke's.
I totally agree with you. I think that they're a team that if you caught them early, you're lucky.
Yeah. All right. Arkansas. Holy smokes. I mean, you and I talked a couple of years ago. We knew that Sam Pittman made two great hires with Browse and Barry Odom. But what does this say about Arkansas? And what does it say about A&M in year 4?
Wow, that's a really, really good question. And in fairness to A&M, there's a big difference between Haynes King and Zach Calzada. I don't know if A&M can win significantly with Zach Calzada. And that's another team in the offensive line that is struggling. And Arkansas can do that to you now. I'll tell you, I was unbelievably surprised when I was doing my study for Texas last week and watching that game. And you come away thinking, wow, Texas is really poor in the offensive line. And then you really start looking at Arkansas up front on defense, and they got some players. And then you watch Texas this last week look really good in the offensive line. So now you're really, asking the question, well, then how good is this front for Arkansas? Because we've seen him do it to Texas. We just saw him do it to Texas A&M. There's a great, culture is an overly used cliche, but it's clearly changed there. And it's interesting too, because I remember when Chad Morris was fired and they had their interim coach and we had them late in the year, and they said, all right, we're going to play KJ Jefferson, true freshman. We're going to play Treylon Burks, true freshman. And it was almost, none of them were ready, but they were good players, right? Now you fast forward 2 years, 3 years, and you have a football team that actually has a lot of really, really good players. I'm not so sure that Sam Pittman didn't actually inherit a bit of a better roster than people think he did.
Yeah. Yeah, as bad a head coach as Chad Morris was at the Power 5 level, his staff, it looks like, did a hell of a job in recruiting over those 2 classes, Tom.
It really did. It really did, because those guys are all playing. I mean, and some of them have become difference-maker type guys.
Yeah. That may be the argument right now between the 3 teams, that Matt Luke and his crew did a good job, because look at that Ole Miss offensive line and Corral and Sanders, and look at Arkansas, and then look at Joe Moorhead, what he left. We counted the Mississippi kids that aren't playing that Moorhead signed, and that's kind of the bread and butter at MSU, and it is staggering how many misses they had over those 2 years. All right, Arkansas at Georgia. We were told earlier today, you have obviously better sources than we do, that KJ Jefferson looks like he's going to be fine. So let's just assume he's healthy. This game in Athens against Georgia, who do you like and why?
I probably like Georgia by a nose, but I don't. If there are people that are going to think that Arkansas is going to go in there and lay down or play poorly, then they're really, really misinformed. Arkansas might be having one of those years where the stars align, and everything just kind of happens for a reason. And we've seen it happen before. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit to see them. They got to have a healthy KJ Jefferson. And I still think in order to beat Georgia, you're going to have to come up with some explosive plays. And they did that against a very talented Texas A&M defense last week. They got big plays downfield in the passing game. I don't think you can beat Georgia without getting a couple of those. So We know Arkansas can run the ball. We know what they are in defense. They have got to be able to get some explosives on offense to swing some momentum on the road.
I know the 2 teams are built different, but who do you like? Who do you think has a better shot to pull the upset this weekend? Ole Miss or Arkansas?
I actually think at Georgia is a more difficult place to play than at Alabama. Just, being in the arena and calling games and with ranked teams, and what was more difficult to deal with, I would say it was Georgia. So I'm going to go with Alabama. Ole Miss has a better chance on the upset.
Okay, Mississippi State. I got to watch LSU on Saturday. They're so ordinary. And MSU made mistake after mistake after mistake, and they're just not good enough to overcome any of that. A&M doesn't look any good. I mean, they look average. MSU travels out to A&M. This could be an ugly, ugly game, considering what you just referenced with Calzada, and A&M doesn't really look good at QB. What do you – Elko and the defense just too much? What do you see in this one?
Yeah, I think so. I look at Mississippi State right now, and I feel like they're a 7-on-7 team, right? I mean, it's just kind of the feel that you get in terms of how they're playing, what they're doing, if anything, on the ground. All right, he had Johnson last week had 8 carries for 51 yards, and I know it sounds like a broken record, but for them to even eclipse 100 yards in rushing, which they did last week, and it's still not enough. They're just going to be too one-dimensional. And that Texas A&M defense now, they've got some guys. If the score can stay low, then it's going to be a football game. But A&M's got better players, but Zach Calzada, if he helps Mississippi State, they'll be in the game.
All right. Auburn at LSU. TJ Finley, the LSU transfer to Auburn, may be the guy now. I just saw LSU. I mean, like I said, they're totally ordinary. They're not well coached. Ogeron's in over his head. But Auburn's in massive transition, too. Auburn at LSU. What do you see?
So, it's crazy to think that Auburn has not won in Baton Rouge since 1999. Can you believe that? 1999. I was like, wow. I didn't realize how big a deal that was. Listen, it's really easy to like the backup quarterback. It's even easier to like him at Auburn because of Bo Nix and his inconsistencies and all those sorts of things, right? But TJ Finley came in and did exactly what we see backup quarterbacks do, right? Made a couple plays, get them out of a hole, win the game, great. So now everybody's clamoring for you. But let's not forget this one thing. Huge emotion. TJ Finley left LSU fairly disgruntled because at the end of the day, prior to Miles Brennan's injury, he was probably going to finish third or fourth on the depth chart there. There's a reason why he left and went somewhere else. So now you got a lot of emotion. You're coming into the game. You're on the road. The environment's going to be hectic. Is TJ Finley going to just be the backup quarterback that everybody loves because they bailed out Bo Nix, or is he going to go in there and win the game for you?
Right.
That's a real question mark for me. And listen, there's some turmoil going on at Auburn right now. Auburn just fired their receiver coach, I think today or yesterday, 4 weeks into the season. And if you watch Brian Harsin and you look at some of his post-game comments and some of the comments about the quarterback play, he's not screwing around, man. I mean, there's a demeanor about him. I think he's trying to send a message to his football team. And so Auburn will be ready to play. The question is, if they go with Finley, does he get caught up in the emotion of it, or does he play good football?
Wow, they fired their wide receiver coach within the last 24 hours?
Yeah, 4 games in.
Yeah, I watched his post game this morning, and you're right. There is no messing around with that guy.
No.
Okay.
And they were asking about the quarterback today. He was having none of it.
Okay.
And I think he'll have those kids battle throughout the week. Probably won't tell them which guy is going to start. They're going to make them earn it.
I got 20 seconds. Florida at Kentucky. Do you think they fall asleep, or will they do enough to get out of Lexington with the W?
I think Kentucky has not been playing good football, and this might be the week they fall. I think Florida is trending in the opposite direction of Kentucky.
Okay. Yeah, man. Kentucky just kept turning the ball over Saturday night. All right, Lugs. Well, you get Texas back-to-back. Enjoy the great state of Texas. We'll talk next week. See you, buddy.
We'll do. All right, buddy.
Tom Luginbill, National College Football Analyst, ESPN, on the Modelo guest line. Brought to you by Havana Smoke Shop. That's where you go to get your premium cigars. Havana Smoke Shop, I-55 North in Jackson, and at the Reservoir across from Shaggy's. Havana Smoke Shop for your next Rocky Patel or La Flor Dominicana cigar.